All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to another SNG Weekly Wrap-Up. I am Greg Otto, and I'm here with Jake Williams. And normally we're joined by Billy Mitchell, but Billy's had a nice little bundle of joy brought into this world. So we're joined by FedScoop reporter Dave Nyczepir to play backup for Billy this week. Dave, welcome to your inaugural SNG Weekly Wrap-Up.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about what's been popping off on FedScoop this week. I'm sure it's been another busy week for you guys.
Yeah, so I was able to catch up this week with CenturyLink, which is one of the primes on the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions contract. For people who don't know what that is, this is the massive $50 billion telecommunications contract that's going to allow agencies to modernize their telecom and their networks. Obviously, right now, the big crisis on our hands is the coronavirus. But in terms of helping agencies prepare for the next big crisis, whatever that might be, they need to modernize their telecom. And CenturyLink voiced some concerns this week about how things are going for the contract primes. They're seeing some issues in terms of agencies issuing contract awards or task order awards under the contract. They've also seen an uptick in lowest price technically acceptable source selection, which they've argued sort of waters down the final product that companies produce because it's not best value contracts. But I also talked to the General Services Administration, and they said while there have been a few delays on a few of these task order awards, that everything still seems to be on track for what they've kind of set as an aggressive deadline of September of 2022. The reason they set this deadline aggressively is because the old contracts that agencies use to modernize their telecommunications are set to expire in May of that year. And so basically right now you've got what seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between what government is seeing on the ground. And I also talked to DoD about lowest price technically acceptable contracts, and they spoke very highly of them as well. But also what the primes are seeing, they're pushing for a little bit more direction from GSA, which has said that will issue guidance if it thinks it's necessary. But to this point, they haven't thought that.
So how is LPTA still a thing? I'm surprised to hear you talk about that, because in conversations I've had with agency CIOs back in like 2016, 2017, they were all pushing to get away from this because they would all say, look, LPTA is fine if you're buying office products or, you know, construction materials or something like that. When it comes to technology, we can't be using LPTA as a way to buy things. So I feel like CIOs would be really butting their heads with procurement officers at this point in 2020 to hear that they're still doing this.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm definitely looking into. I talked to DoD a little bit about that and tried to get a sense for just how prevalent these LPTA source selections are as they're doing EIS procurements. They couldn't give me an exact number. And the reason for that is while this is all going on, they're also in the process of updating the federal procurement data system that they use to track procurements.
Okay.
So the goal is to have that finished by June 2020, and then they'll actually be able to tell and track source selection. So they'll know if a contract is LPTA or if it's best value, and then they can get a better sense for the landscape. So that's at least the plan for DoD. With GSA, it's a little less clear. But both agencies said that right now, in order to speed up their transitions, that agencies may need to stick with LPTA a little bit longer.
It survives. It survives more and more as we head into the 2020s. Jake, what went on in the world of State Scoop and Ed Scoop?
Yeah, I mean, talk about things that survive, and one of them is always going to be Congress debating about money. So the big news this week for us, covered by Ben Fried on my team, was the long-awaited pandemic relief bill that House Democratic leaders proposed. That bill contained more than $3 trillion in funding, and it's the proposed follow-on action to the stimulus action that passed Congress earlier on during the coronavirus crisis. Now, in this new proposed bill, nearly a third of that money is dedicated to state and local governments, which is certainly good news to governors and leadership in state and local governments. Specifically, about 500 billion of it is for states. Another 375 billion goes to cities. So the chairs of the National Governors Association, that's Larry Hogan in Maryland and Andrew Cuomo in New York, have urged quick passage of the bill, and they're definitely clamoring for that support. But the downside, there's no direct funding for IT or for cybersecurity programs or grants that pretty much every organization in the GovTech space has been asking for. So before the proposed bill was even released, NASCIO, that's the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, and 10 other groups asked for funding specifically for government IT, especially as unemployment portals and health insurance marketplaces are kind of crushed. We've talked about it on this weekly wrap up under that massive demand. And then on the cyber front, the states were asking for help to kind of shore up their cybersecurity procedures and to have those resources available to help smaller local governments who might not have access to the funding and certainly not access to the cybersecurity expertise. So that said, the bill that was proposed does have $1.5 billion in funding for mobile broadband hotspots, $4 billion in funding for rural internet providers to connect low-income households, and another $2 billion for telemedicine programs in remote areas. So that plus another $3.6 billion in grants for mail-in voting and election security funding is good, but certainly not the cyber and IT funding that states were hoping for. Now, granted, all of that said, the proposal is just that. It's a proposal. So while it's supported by bipartisan chairs of the NGA, the bill was proposed by House Democratic leadership. And anybody who's followed Washington for more than a day knows that the bill, that if the bill eventually makes it to the president's desk, it will look different than what we have today. So, the proposal was certainly interesting for the community. And thankfully, not all hope is lost. We just had a story post yesterday that not all hope is lost for the requested cyber and IT funding. Representative John Katko, he's a Republican from New York, said the funding could find a home in the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's an annual bill that Congress votes on each year to authorize the country's defense funding. And he's the top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee, so he certainly has a vocal perspective in those deliberations. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here. But for now, funding good, not much funding for IT bad. So we'll see what happens.
Do states really depend on federal funding for their IT systems? I'm just wondering that, like, obviously the House isn't always putting together pandemic relief packages, right. So it's hard to base it off that, but I'm wondering how much federal assistance really goes into state and local IT budgets.
Well, so the answer is certainly complicated, but the answer really is yes and no, right? So all state funding is in some way reliant on federal funding and federal dollars, but on a day-to-day basis, on a year-to-year basis, no. I mean, the state IT functions normally function as a part of state budgets and are a big part of that. However, as we've talked about on this weekly wrap-up, and as we've certainly covered on State Scoop for the past 5 to 8 years, however long we've been around. Modernization of technology is certainly something that you need that large influx of capital to address, to do it in a way that would really solve the problems at hand. And so states don't have that large influx of capital in their budgets every go around. And so an opportunity like a pandemic relief bill that happens to also include issues for states with unemployment systems and healthcare exchanges, it kind of lines up to be an opportunity for states to really take advantage of this potential funding to solve some of the problems right now that the pandemic has caused, but also long term for their residents.
Cool. So,
Greg, tell me what. What's going on cybersecurity?
No, I was just going to say that the government theme keeps going for this week on Cyberscoop. There was really two things government-wise, cybersecurity, that made news for us. One, on Tuesday, the federal government behind FBI and DHS released a bunch of malware indicators to the public that look to be behind a lot of what North Korea is doing. A lot of the malware was, it had been out there before. Like if you went on VirusTotal and uploaded some of these files to VirusTotal would return back, oh, this is this type of malware. And if you search a little more, yeah, this is North Korea. But there were 26 pieces of malware or malware indicators that were made public and put on VirusTotal. And this is a joint effort that goes on between FBI, DHS, and US Cyber Command. This has gone on, I believe, since last year, might even be back to 2018, where there is a concerted effort that is led by Cyber Command to call out bad actors via posting their malware publicly to say, okay, you are not hiding. You can't hide behind obfuscation. Like, we know who you are, and stop doing this. And we're going to make sure that the world understands that this is what they need to do to recognize who this malware is coming from. Now, that has always been North Korea. There have been very few, I believe there's only been one of the 6 or 7 times that Cyber Command has done this, where it has not been North Korean malware. So it's just almost a way right now for Cyber Command to pick on the North Koreans. This was really interesting on Tuesday, because Tuesday was the 3rd anniversary of the WannaCry attack, that big global ransomware attack that took down a bunch of companies across the world. Merck, Maersk, FedEx, they were all hit pretty hard by WannaCry. And the government likes to do some things with flair sometimes. So Tuesday being the 3rd anniversary of WannaCry obviously shows that that falls in line with that. That story would have been enough, but that got knocked off the headlines on Wednesday when FBI and DHS put out what was basically a public service announcement, I guess that you could say. It's hard to call it like a malware indication or any sort of like technical alert, because there really wasn't any technical indicators or indicators of compromise. However, it was an alert that said, hey, if you are in the healthcare sector, or if you are doing research into a coronavirus vaccine or any sort of treatment into COVID-19, be on the lookout for Chinese-based hackers. They are going after COVID-19 research, and everybody needs to be aware of this. And this has been, obviously, due to the news and on Wednesday, this was a little bit more full-throated than what we saw on Tuesday, obviously because of what's going on in the world. We tried to ask the White House about it a little bit, because the White House has been posting a lot of calls on COVID-19 testing and the research, and they didn't bite in talking about this alert at all. They were just like, look, we're focused on the testing. The alert is what it is. However, there is now a warning that has been thrown up saying, hey, China's coming after any research that is done from US entities. And I would not be surprised if it is worldwide at this point, because we're seeing hospitals and healthcare systems across the board being hit, whether it is from a ransomware attack standpoint or from just stealing intellectual property and research. We're seeing that across the board, and it looks like that China's out there trying to figure out what's going on and see if they can steal anything for their own purposes.
Now, Greg, so 2 examples there of the U.S. government kind of putting 2 other countries on blast, really. So China, North Korea. Does it work? I mean, I don't follow this stuff quite as tightly as you do, but what are some of the ramifications? Does it actually have an impact?
So it's funny, there are a lot of people within the government and like former govies that have done this before that will argue about this till the ends of the earth of whether it works or not. I would have said 6 months ago, and I actually, even prior to 6 months ago, I wrote a story maybe a year and a half ago that was like, are we sure that this is really going to work? Because, okay, you called them out, like you can't arrest them. You're not going to go to Pyongyang and say, hey, can you extradite? Like, obviously we don't have that relationship with North Korea. And I bring that up because with WannaCry, we did in fact call out somebody that we think is attached to Lazarus Group. I mean, I believe his name is Park Jin-tak. He is on wanted posters everywhere. I mean, he's a wanted individual. However, I would be shocked if he's left North Korea or even northeastern China, where I believe the government said that he did a lot of his work for Lazarus Group. So they called him out. However, we have seen the bar raise in terms of how difficult it is to get away with this without being detected. That goes with the effort by Cyber Command. If you call out publicly this malware, people know to look for it. I mean, we can talk about all the the elite 0 days and all the cool hacker stuff that all of these state-run APTs are doing. And yeah, that stuff exists. But at the end of the day, it's still being run by human beings, and human beings are lazy. Like if I have something that I know is going to work and it's easy for me to do, I'm going to do that 10 times out of 10 over the hard thing it is to pull off. So I think calling people out raises the bar so they can't use that easy stuff and they have to work harder to try to get what they want. In the meantime, the US government and private companies can run to other private sector companies and say, you need to raise the bar with your cybersecurity in the meantime, because they're going to come back. Like they definitely are going to try to come back and try to hack you again. But in the meantime, you can shore up your defenses, and hopefully when they come back, they just, they try, fail, and move on to go try to find some other low-hanging fruit.
Interesting. Yeah,
cool.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Great talking to you guys as usual. Dave, hopefully you can join us again. I would imagine Billy's going to be tied up with his little boy again next week. So if we talk to you again next week, great. If not, we'll have to have you back on the program soon.